thank you for being here today, and particularly to these folks from the museum. Thank you for inviting me, or Jonathan and me representing the archives, but me as a speaker and as an artist. It's a great opportunity to be in the public and to share some things that have been part of my life since I was a kid. So I kind of start all that off by a couple of words of introduction. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and those of you who are sort of familiar with that industrial hub would know that railroads were everywhere. In the late 50s and 60s, there were plenty of passenger trains connecting our city with plenty of other cities. We also had an extensive streetcar system. By the early 1960s, we still had close to 300 streetcars running on 300 miles of track. It was an amazing web that linked the greater Pittsburgh district together. One of my grandfathers took me on plenty of train rides and streetcar rides, and I began to experience that connectivity and what it meant to the life of our city. It was something that everybody took for granted, but it was what existed at that time. Well, as Grandpa took me on those train rides and those trolley rides, I began to realize that there were other messages coming around through the newspapers. And those messages were ones of progress that necessitated the abandonment of streetcars and trains. That didn't fit very well with me, not just because trains and trolleys were kind of cool, but I thought, wait a minute, there's a connectivity, there's sort of a fabric that these transportation modes helped tighten and knit. It gave life and a certain civility to our city. But as those things were being let go in the name of progress, well, there was something going on. That fabric of our society was beginning to fray. And we could see it at the national level too, because of the Vietnam era and the civil unrest of racial troubles. So all of that was going on. And I came to a point which then informed most of my adult career as an artist, that railroads do more than provide mobility. And railroad art helps us understand it. Got that? Okay, so that's the whole topic for the day. Thanks for coming. I have a train to catch. We'll see you. That's the one thing that I want you to remember today, and I'll be coming at that from a couple of different ways. So here's a beginning question. I want some raised hands on this. How many of you have ever built anything with Legos? Yours, your kids, grandkids? Okay, I think that's about 100%. That's pretty good. Thank you. Well, you know, when you build with Legos, you get a box or a package, and there's a picture on that of what's inside. So you open it up and you follow the directions, and pretty soon you build that boat or that building or that train or that airplane or whatever it happens to be. Well, then what happens is you take that apart and you start putting things together again in your own way, or your grandkids' own way. Creative constructions that you wouldn't have dreamed of. Well, in a way, that's what this lecture is about today. We're talking about railroads and art and American life as all being companions. And to that mix, we're adding, maybe a little bit of humor here and there, but some sociology and psychology, as well as beauty. So one would not necessarily expect to have this overlapping series of topics. But that's what I'm going to do. And I want you then to take from this that main point, I'll say it again, that railroads provide more to a culture than just mobility. And art helps us understand that. And we're going to start then with this. Georgianne Geyer was a noted columnist and writer. And she said, I love cars, but they are simply an amplified version of all the frustrations and confrontations of everyday life. Buses I have never liked. On a train, however, you get, if you look and see, a deep abiding sense of the continuity of the processes of nature and life. You have to look and see, Georgianne Geyer says. It's not necessarily obvious. And in this painting of mine, we have the California Zephyr under Amtrak's leadership curving around the stream and the mountains on the west coast, or the west slope of the Colorado Rockies. But that is a Georgianne Geyer quote of substance. We're going to go, as this lecture goes on, we'll be going back and forth between some historical paintings and contemporary ones. This is a 1929 painting, Gustav Krollmann. Notice the title more than even the picture, Companion of Mountains. The Northern Pacific and the artist are saying that trains and the environment fit together. There's a complementary nature, a companionship. And that is what really has informed much of my thinking and my painting. This is one of my favorite railroad paintings, and there's not a train to be seen in the painting. This is another Krollmann painting from the late 20s of Mount Rainier. Again, one of this series for the Northern Pacific. And I have written there that art is allusive. It's an indirect but meaningful reference. It's suggestive of something. Art can never be a literal photocopy of reality. It points to something beyond itself and presents the subject as something to experience. And this painting does it in a marvelous way. We as viewers are invited to walk up this pathway. It's a familiar pathway, but we're invited to follow that path and then stand on this edge and look at something new. In other words, we are invited to experience something. This painting was composed and presented as advertising art for the Northern Pacific, inviting people from the East Coast or the South to come to the West and to see this kind of a grand vista. In my story, artwork played a role, not only mine as a kid, but particularly the railroad artwork of Griff Teller, and I have two of Griff Teller's paintings here. When I was probably 8 or 9 years old, we began to get some of these calendars, and I was enthralled. This is Pittsburgh, and the title of the painting is Pittsburgh Promotes Progress. And what Griff Teller has done here with this painting is really showing the vibrancy of Pittsburgh, you know, coming out of the dark, smoky city heritage. He paints the vitality of the city on top of its transportation systems. So the corollary is that transportation undergirds the civility and the connectivity of our cities. And we see it here with the bridges and roads, streetcars, the rivers, and of course the trains. The themes continue to this rural setting, the famous Horseshoe Curve in central Pennsylvania, where the railroad fits the landscape. Well, fast forward about 40 years to my career and some of the early art that I was doing, this piece to promote the Talgo trains, which Amtrak was demonstrating in the Northwest Rail Corridor. We see Mount Rainier in the background, and I was wrestling with these ideas of what is there about a railroad or about trains and that connection with land and community. I was looking for the idea, is there sort of a DNA about railroading? What makes it so distinctive? So even though I didn't have an answer to that question, I'm painting it with the enthusiasm and hopefully with some of the sensitivities and perspectives of the other artists like Griff Teller. One little note here, when this painting was done, it was pointed out to me that back here was the paper mill in Tacoma. And one of my more witty colleagues wanted to know if this was a scratch and sniff poster. I digress. A number of publications came my way, and if you're interested in what the content of some of these and other books are, I'll be happy to share it with you later. Just the point is, a lot has been written about art and railroads. It was such an important part of our transportation and civic fabric. But these are books that were very meaningful in my story. But it all came together when Alfred Runte asked me to do this cover painting for this particular book, Allies of the Earth, Railroads and the Soul of Preservation. Runte is a local historian. And he introduced me to the writings of Aldo Leopold. Leopold was an early environmentalist, and he was writing about flora and fauna. But get this, a thing or a project is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It's wrong when it tends otherwise. That jumped out at me, and I thought, railroads inherently preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty. Now, they don't always do that. Railroads have been known to create all kinds of problems when in the hands of the wrong leadership. But that aside, the technology, there's something that's inherent in this mode of transportation that we've missed. It's what I experienced as a teenager. I saw this being overlooked or never even discussed by people who were talking about the abandonments of streetcars and trains as part of progress. So I'm saying that railroads inherently tend to preserve this. So the question then, when we look at this kind of art, is not what is this a painting of? Sure, it's a painting of a diesel or a boxcar or a caboose. No, the real question is, what is this painting about? And this quote is not mine. I wish I could take credit for it. James Popsis is a contemporary British landscape photographer, and this comes from the writings of James Popsis. So we're going to look at a series of historical paintings now. And I want you to look at these through the eyes of that question. What is this about? As well as the integrity, stability, and beauty that Aldo Leopold was discussing. So here, this is a early 20s kind of piece published by the Great Northern, The Call of the Mountains. What's it a painting of? Well, it's a Blackfeet Indian standing there. He's looking at a mountain. What's the painting about? Much deeper. We, as the viewers, are invited to stand and look at the mountain, just as he's looking at it. More to the point, we are invited to see it as he sees it. We are to stand there, as it were, with that same stance. It's a stance of awe that recognizes a divine thumbprint on the land that is worthy of our response of support. There's a lot in this. Great Northern embraced the Blackfeet, and indeed they had Vinald Rice do about 300 of these kinds of pastel renderings of Blackfeet people. He did a grand service of that in the history of the Montana, western Montana, where Glacier Park is now. So it wasn't just the people that show up in historic railroad art, places do too. So what do you see when you look at that first? It's the mountain. You almost don't even see the train. It's not that important in some ways. It's just right there. And if you look at what the artist has done, there are all these horizontal lines and striations across and the train is just one of those lines. If it weren't for the tree that breaks the vertical or breaks that horizontal motion, you might not even see it when you look at it at first. Landscape. The train is the means to the end. We are invited to ride the Northern Pacific through Montana and see that. The eastern version, or an eastern version of this, Storm King Mountain along the Hudson. It's like we were walking through the forest and we come out on this sun-splashed meadow just as this train roars by, and we see this connection, this relationship between transportation modes and the land. So people, land, we see it with architecture, and this is just one of many pieces of art that the railroads commissioned to celebrate American architecture. So, where is that? Anybody have any ideas? Columbia Gorge. Okay, Columbia Gorge. Anybody else? Any guesses?
On an observation car.
That's exactly what it is. You see, it does happen to be the Pacific coast, but we don't know where. And in a way, it doesn't matter. But you see, what Jonathan has said, this is the platform of an open-end observation car. And here is the scalloped awning at the top. Here are the pickets, or the railing. And we are inside. We are invited to open the door and walk out onto that platform with those people. Because, why? Because this is a shared experience. Our connection with the land via the railroad is a shared experience. It's not isolationist. And this is one of those themes that tied together so much of this kind of artwork. It was such a part of the railroad's presentation. That's how they wanted to be seen. That we are inviting you corporately to share this story and add to it with your own story. Another observation car rendering, this from trackside looking back. And this again here, this is the scenic Northwest. That happens to be Mount Index in the background. So we have people, we have landscape, we have the architecture, we have the shared experience. We have another shared experience with people, and that is with children and family. So this is a mid-20s, I guess, maybe early 30s, Lionel catalog. And what we have here is a dad says, son, let's build the finest Lionel railroad in town. So the two of them are going to do that. But look at the image even closer. They are looking at the catalog. They're looking at a Lionel catalog. And each of them pointing at something there. So what is all this behind them? It's what they are dreaming. And the artist suggests that with this kind of cotton ball-like base. It's this ethereal kind of experience. The dad and the son are seeing the importance of their connection. But and so it's moving from just the catalog to what's in their brains, what they're going to do together. There's another little sidebar to this painting. Maybe that kid wants to be a locomotive engineer. Maybe not. So what? But Lionel was very much interested in the railroad ethos, not just what happened on the trains, but in the environment, the civic structure that made all that possible. So it was the electrical engineer, the civil engineer, the mechanical engineer, not just the locomotive engineer. So there is so much implied in this little piece of art. Another great whimsical piece, Archibald Willard painted that famous Spirit of 1776 painting. So here the Union Pacific picked up on that in this whole series of the books on the Yellowstone bears. Kids couldn't wait to get on the train and get these books. Here we have another kid-focused piece of art. This from the New York Central system along the Hudson River, perhaps near Poughkeepsie, who knows. So these kids are coming home from school, or maybe they just came down from their house to watch the passenger trains roar by, and they're waving at the engineman. You can't really see it too well here, but the engineer in the diesel there. Not only do we have those humorous moments, those inviting moments with children, we have the poignant moments of the railroad in American life, and there are a couple of images here from World War II. This is Dean Cornwell painting for the Pennsylvania Railroad. Another piece from the New Haven Railroad, the kid in upper 4. This is a tearjerker. And the New Haven is saying to its patrons, please give up your birth space during the war when you can, so the troops can get a good night's rest. And if you read this copy, you'd see that kid's dreaming, not in dreams, but thinking, what is this war thing going to be like? He's leaving home. He's going to be on a troop ship the next day. So there's this kind of art permeated our culture. All of it was just a part of the dailiness of railroading. And the art was part of the dailiness of this message of connectivity, of integrity, stability, and yes, beauty. Post-war, we had some grand industrial design. This is a Brooks Stevens design for passenger trains for the Milwaukee Road. It's hard to see with this lighting, but here this young fellow cowboy with his pony just stopped on the edge there, and he has his hat waving to the fireman in the diesel locomotive. But it wasn't just, you see, not just the beauty of the trains, in the beauty of the setting, but it was also the beauty of the brochure. The people who got this brochure were worthy of that kind of art and that kind of expression. Another ad, this one for the Great Northern, which says, "Hi partner, ride the ranch." What that means is there were cars called the ranch cars on the key trains of the Great Northern. They were designed like for using ranch motifs. In fact, they even had their own G-bar-N brand, which had to be registered in the state of Montana. I didn't know that part until about a week ago. But I want to step back and just say one social thing about this. If you notice, there's a black gentleman here serving these folks in the ranch car. In all the years that I've been doing these kinds of investigations and paintings and presentations, don't find very many black people as the passengers. And there are a number of paintings where they show, where folks of African descent show up in service positions. A. Philip Randolph was a union leader with the Pullman Company. He was actually the first president, I believe it was a sleeping car porters union. And he made it possible for so many black people to get good jobs. If it hadn't been for Randolph, those men, more men than women, would not have had the lifestyle that came to them because of that service. Again, we're dealing with multiple narratives, difficult issues, but this was a big part of American railroad scene. And we have to give credit to people like A. Philip Randolph for making that possible for those men particularly, to have the family life that they did. So here we have Glacier National Park. That's Mount St. Nicholas in the background. Which way is that train going? Doesn't matter. Bingo. Did you read my notes? Okay. It doesn't matter. We're talking connectivity here, folks. We don't see an engine. We don't see a rear-end observation car. It's not important. What the artist is saying is that this train connects people. It connects place. And it introduces you to place, in this case, the grandeur of Glacier Park. Another dome car ad. This time we are in the dome car and we're looking at people. We're not even looking at the grand scenery. This young fella is, and he's pointing, showing something to his sister. That's important. But what's also important is the reaction of these folks over here. They're intrigued by that. This was something that was so common. It was so ordinary as a part of the railroad world, or the role of the railroad in American life. That kind of connection, stability, relational stability, beauty, yep, and integrity, connection. Then we get to the early 60s. This is one of the last ads that the Santa Fe ran. It can't write, it can't read, it doesn't have a degree, it never went to school, but after books, it's one of the best teachers of American history. Now think about the impact of that. What that copywriter and that happens to be a photograph, what the photographer is saying is the rail car is a teacher. Isn't that not profound? And if you read the rest of the copy, it lays out a whole trip from Chicago to LA, including to coming to Disneyland. But it's all there. There's something about the process of that, the connectivity of it all, the integrity of it all that works. And the railroad is the environment. It makes that happen. It sponsors that. It lifts that. It lifts the people. Then we shift from that to that. Do you catch the irony? This is an old Porsche ad. When I saw it, I thought, dude, I have to have this. But you see the text, like your own portable amusement park. We just went from a transportation mode that teaches and enriches and builds and connects to a transportation mode that what? Entertains, and that's all. Where's the context? It isn't. It's a blur. Where's the connectivity? Where's the community on that observation car platform or in those dome cars? It's not there. It's all individual, your own portable amusement park. Always count on Winston Churchill for good quotes. He said, "We shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us." Is that not profound? And I'm saying the same thing. The same thing can be said of our transportation systems. We shaped the auto culture. Our choice, nobody forced it. And now we live with the consequences. In our haste and individualism, we've forgotten that when the trains went away, so did the art. And so did the message of integrity, stability, and beauty. I saw this billboard down in Tacoma once. At 10 it's news, at 11 it's history. I thought, I don't have a camera, I can't take a picture of this, it's probably going to be gone by the time I get back here. You know, the idea, of course, is that only the present counts. How shallow. And what happened to the grand artwork? Well, we've devolved into this cynical, in your face kind of stuff. Welcome to Washington, state statue and the state animal and so on. We've lost that glorious imagery. So now we're shifting. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to be running through my art and giving you an idea of what has constituted the last 30 years of my work. So these themes of integrity, stability, and beauty, about what a painting is about, all these things are important. So I'm going to go through these things at a quicker rate, but you'll get a sense of this. This Glacier National Park, as is this. This is a very similar painting to one you'll see on the table, and which was part of the opening, was the opening slide. Both of those paintings reflect Glacier, this East Glacier Park Station. The two most popular paintings of all the hundreds and hundreds of paintings that I've done for the last 35 years, these two stand out at the top. And it's, again, the connectivity of people and place and respect of land. Stations are important. Here we have King Street Station in Seattle. This was done for the centennial of King Street Station. From large station to small station, this one was for Amtrak, but that is totally hypothetical scene. Amtrak wanted a painting that would celebrate this locomotive, which was painted to honor veterans. So they said, Craig, we want you to think small town, think Mid-America, think Norman Rockwell. So I tried to do that in putting together this vet and his grandson and these returning veterans with their families. Red pickup truck with an MIA sticker on it. And you know, it's Mid-America. There's a farm. We have grain elevators. We have flags and a typical small town station. Rural, again, this is a Canadian scene inspired by some mountain vistas in the Canadian Rockies done for a tour company. Some of my work is projecting to the future. And what we have here is the X2000. This was a Swedish, or is, a Swedish-built train, a train that is called pendular. It swings, it's an active tilt system, can take curves at a higher rate of speed. And this was a piece that was commissioned back in the 90s when a number of foreign railroad builders were bringing equipment to the U.S. And I ended up having about 6 or 7 commissions to do various trains like that. It's just been wonderful. This is another one of those series, the Talgo trains, and that setting is down south of Chehalis. This painting has an allegorical sky, and it was commissioned by the state of Oregon to celebrate or to commemorate, really, the Lewis and Clark bicentennial. So we have here this train along an estuary crossing a bridge. All the images of this painting were actually within a 30-mile stretch of that right-of-way, and we went out there on a horribly wet day taking pictures and trying to do sketches of what we could put together. The client wanted this kind of a combined sort of image. The allegorical sky, it's hard to see from here, but we have Thomas Jefferson, Sacagawea, Lewis, and Clark. And that style in my painting is a reprise of something from the 1930s. Many artists, including Griff Teller and others, used this to sort of tell a backup story. And the backup story is that in their day, those were visionaries. And in our day, we need visionaries like that as we wrestle with our transportation systems. This is a recent painting of a rebuilt 1930s streamliner. I have 2 images here from the Grand Canyon, and this is worth a brief pause. Back in the late 1990s, the National Park Service invited the Grand Canyon Railway and a number of other agencies to create an image or a vision for what public transport could be around the south rim of the Grand Canyon. So I worked with a number of historians and with the Grand Canyon Railway. Al Runte, who I mentioned earlier, was the introduction, provided the introduction to this. We put together a plan for the Grand Canyon Railway to build a light rail system around the South Rim historic areas. And you can see just a hint of this self-propelled rail car in the middle. This particular image is a little closer, gives you an idea of what we had in mind for the way it would tie in visually. We'd have a bike trail. The paved area to where the train is would be for emergency vehicles or supply vehicles. There'd be bike trails as well as hiking paths. It's all in there. And this particular painting showed up on the front page of USA Today one day. When Kathy and I were walking through King Street Station and we looked at it and said, "That's my painting." I had no idea that they were going to use it. But it was a very visionary idea. And I had the privilege of serving that idea. If it hadn't been for a change of political administrations, this could very well have happened. White Pass in Yukon. Any of you folks ridden the White Pass going up in Alaska? Highly recommend. Grand. Here we have Lynn Canal in the background and the Sawtooth Mountains. Figure where they got that name. But this is, again, a historical painting, but yet it's contemporary because the railway still does a magnificent job interpreting railway in the north. Another Alaska piece. This engine is being rebuilt and will be running again, well, not this summer, but probably next, near Anchorage. Historical poster from, what's that, 2002. The Montana by Steam, no longer in existence, but they ran a number of very noted historical themed excursions. And in my painting, I'm picking up the artistic themes of Gustav Krollmann with which I started this show. This interurban car is actually on the other side of these cars. It's in this building and it's being rebuilt now. As far as we know, it's the last surviving interurban car from the Puget Sound Electric that ran between Seattle and Tacoma. And you know, you could do that in slightly over an hour in 1902. Wow. Go figure. How about that? How about that? But I don't have any feelings about that. You know. This is one of a number of paintings that I did for the Pennsylvania Trolley Museum. These are visionary kinds of paintings that look forward. Even though the subject is historical, we're presenting here what that campus is going to look like. A rendering, in this case, of King Street Station downtown. And a lot of that has been built. Another rendering, looking forward. So you see here, I'm not just looking backward, I'm looking forward to what could be. We have here Tacoma, in this case, Tacoma Dome Station, with the parking garage in the background and buses in the foreground, the Sounder commuter trains here, and the Link Light Rail over to downtown Tacoma. That looks exactly like it was shown in the rendering. This was an idea for heavy rail and light rail coming into SeaTac Airport. This particular concept did not get built, but that painting went national and was used to express vision. The East Side Rail Line, some of you know, no longer exists, but it was a corridor. It went from Renton up to Snohomish. And we had worked with a number of people to produce, again, a visionary booklet. And the work that I did was the artwork side of that. This was one of the railroad crossings in Kirkland, and it shows bike trail, hiking trail, buses, and the train. Interesting point here, when this particular painting was released, it was part of a whole series. And we had a group of local politicians and business people and transportation people gathered around in Woodinville. And the guest speaker that day was a fellow in charge of a similar project in the Bay Area. And he was the main guest, and as part of his introduction, he turned to the director of the agency I was working for, and he said, "I want to thank you for your vision, having all these renderings out there." And there were probably 8 or 10 of them, of what we wanted to do. He said, "I wish that we could have had this sort of set of imagery when we were in our process 2 years ago." He said it would have saved so much time, so much money, and so much headache, because it would have explained what we could have done. So thank you for putting all those renderings out there. I did not have the heart to tell him that 2 years before that meeting, I was talking with him, and I said, "You need some renderings to show what this is going to look like." "Oh no, that's extravagant. We can't afford that." Enough said. Again, some ideas for small town connectivity, electrification of railroads. This is one of the most recent renderings, and it's an idea for a high-speed rail connection to O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Coming down to the end now, this painting is entitled, "Will the Fog Ever Lift?" And it's the Empire Builder along the Mississippi River. Now, what ho, it's a foggy day. That's just the title as you look at the painting. But the title is a deeper title. The fog that I'm really referring to is the fog of our culture that does not see the connection between rail and society, does not see the connection between rail and integrity, stability, and beauty. It's why I do what I do as an artist. This quote from Tony Judt is poignant. Railways were and remain the necessary accompaniment to the emergence of civil society. If we throw away the railway stations and the lines leading to them, as we did in the 1950s and 1960s, we shall be throwing away our memory of how to live the confident civic life. Just let that just set on your brain for a moment. It's very profound. Over the 35 years that I've been doing this, I've probably done more paintings for Amtrak of the Empire Builder than any other particular train. And this, a recent one from just a few years ago, showing the train east of Glacier Park on the prairies. The most recent piece for Amtrak was this 50-year poster that was done for spring of 2021. It shows families, in this case this little kid talking with a railway conductor with a model train. They're looking forward, but there are other trains in this picture, present trains, past trains. It's a image that speaks of connectivity. That's what the painting is about. It's of those subject matters, but it is about this connection. So I conclude with this image, the cover painting from Al Runte's Trains of Discovery, Railroads and the Legacy of Our National Parks. This again is Mount St. Nicholas in the background with the train along the middle fork of the Flathead. The title of the painting is Guardians of the Legacy. The message, of course, is that the National Park Service, here's the ranger on mule, is a guardian of the legacy that is Glacier Park. But the deeper message is that the railroad is also a guardian of the legacy. And this goes back to the very first slide, one of those first slides from the Northern Pacific where I talked about companions. Companion of mountains, the North Coast Limited. Companion of mountains, the Empire Builder. And I conclude with this quote from Runte. Artists in particular have done more than represent the railroad as historical fact. Rather, they have suggested and convincingly that railroads have somehow fulfilled society's larger dreams and expectations, and that this form of technology still promises the best of national mobility, environmental stewardship, and civil society. So thank you all. Thank you for being here.